Hello and welcome to the Move Your Business Forward podcast. These talks are hosted by Rob Boll, founder of Evoke Management and CEO of International Leaders UK. He'll be talking with experts from both these companies about issues that affect SME companies today.
Welcome to today's podcast. This is in a series we're doing focused on the big squeeze. All businesses right now are currently facing the same issues: inflation, supply chain, and recruitment. Today we're going to talk about a particular topic that I think is relevant across all of those challenges, which is business productivity. So what are the best ways to improve productivity around the business, which might help you in terms of better margin, the need for less people, potentially able to absorb more things within your current team, and anything else that might impact your supply chain. If there's a way of being more productive around that, that can help as well. But we're not going to restrict ourselves to that. Anything that would be a useful best practice or best way to improve productivity. Today, I'm joined by two of my colleagues from Evoke, Nick, who's an experienced commercial director, and Stephen, who's an experienced commercial and finance director, CFO, both working with a range of SMEs, helping them on their growth journey. So, Stephen, I'm going to come to you first and just get your take on productivity and your top tips or things you think are useful to bear in mind for improving productivity within your business.
Okay. Well, for me, I think there's sort of two levers that you've got. There's the ability to increase the top line around the sort of revenue, and then there's obviously on the cost side. So firstly, on the revenue side, I always find it's quite a good place to start to try and focus on your core clients. Look at the sort of top 10 most important clients within your business, and really delve into the profitability of that business, of those clients, to see whether people understand the contracts, whether we are optimizing the positions with those clients. And quite often you find that there's more opportunity in those bigger clients where you can actually enhance your profitability, whereas previously you might be spending a lot of time with the sort of tail of that business. So I'd be looking to sort of put in account reviews to make sure that every opportunity has been identified, ensure there's no sort of scope creep within that everyone is doing exactly what they're contracted to do. Understanding the pricing and the profitability of that is critical, and by having sort of regular reviews with the client and with the account manager, if you have an account manager on those sort of clients, you can identify ways to sort of cross-sell, and quite often that's a lot cheaper than going out and finding new clients. So for me, that's a top tip that naturally flows through to the productivity.
One of the big things with big clients, I always find looking at companies, is they tend to overservice them because they're the big shiny client that they're really pleased to have, and end up doing potentially a lot more work than you probably should do for what you're being paid. And I think that is a big thing coming into profitability and how to be more productive with the range of clients that a company's got. Have you got any thoughts around that in terms of how to assess, over-servicing, because that's the good thing to do rather than the bad thing to do, which is just over-servicing and not making it a profitable?
No, absolutely. And it just naturally happens because quite often the point of contact with those clients, they're their day-to-day contact. And, by trying to do what they ask, you quite often find that you're doing more and more, and actually your productivity is getting worse and worse. So we used to almost embed something called like a doctor's surgery, where the key contact would have to come and present to someone else in the business who, look at it with a sort of fresh pair of eyes, and would actually suddenly say, well, why aren't you doing that? And have you thought about doing it a different way? And quite often those individuals would be managing other relationships, and then you start to sort of share best practice without realizing it. It's amazing how even if you sit next to someone else and within the business, and something might seem perfectly obvious for you, but by just doing that natural review every year, or however often works for your business, you can combat exactly what you just said.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea, that kind of client review or doctor's surgery, just to kind of share best practice and be on top of things. Nick, what's your thoughts around productivity from your perspective?
Thanks, Rob. I guess coming at it from a purely commercial perspective, some of my experiences working with founders of SMEs, they they're consumed with the sales process and consumed with the productivity that comes from it. And I guess, in my experience, you've got to look quite carefully as to whether people are in the right jobs, doing what they should be doing, and being as productive as they can be. Some people are hugely productive and appear not to be working that hard, but that's because their experience enables them to qualify leads much sooner than perhaps more junior members of the sales team. Conversely, there are people who in organizations who can be quite disruptive, and I think we've probably all experienced people who, if they are disruptive, that can have a very negative impact upon the team as a whole. So I think, keeping a close eye on the individuals, making sure that everybody is doing a job to the best of their ability, and potentially moving them if they're not, is pretty crucial.
No, great. Thanks for sharing that. And I think that's right. It's making sure you've got the right people in the right role. And often over time, especially in an SME, people's role has an element of creep. And you start to realize, actually, are they still doing the things that they should be doing? Maybe what they're best at doing, and the right things for their skill set, and probably what you're paying them as well, is really, really important to review.
No, I think on that point, Rob, it's getting the right person to do the right job. Yeah. And a lot of people struggle to delegate certain tasks. They want to control every aspect of it. But actually, by getting someone else to do the PowerPoint, or someone else to provide the information, the data, the spreadsheets, they'll do it 3 times quicker than they will do it. They'll do it better, and it will make them look better as well. But too often people sort of feel threatened or feel like delegating is not the right thing to do.
No, exactly. I actually refer to this in a couple of colors sometimes. I talk about red being your kind of admin level type stuff that you're working on. The blue is your kind of operational day-to-day, bringing the money in, collecting the money, closing your business. And then your green is your visionary strategic stuff. And anyone running a business should really be in that green space. That's your kind of £1,000 an hour type work. Your blue is your £100 an hour type work. And red, is £10 to £15 an hour type stuff. Most business owners end up doing all of those 3. And sometimes if you take a step back and go, actually, am I doing the things that have got the highest value that I should be doing? You're always going to have to dip down a bit into that blue, ideally not the red, but sometimes unavoidable. But just thinking about where your time's going, and is that the right efficiency with your time? I think that's a good way of doing it. I encourage people to look at their calendar and start color coding it in colors and going, wow, where have I actually spent my time? And is that the most valuable use of my time when I've been working? The one thing I wanted to touch on is productivity. We've talked about, you can see it in the numbers, you can see it in processes like a sales process, but I always think unless you can measure it, you can't improve it. And that's what we're talking about here, being more productive. You've got to improve how we do things. And I think defining what productivity is across the business and then measuring it to be able to improve it is quite a challenge. What if you were going to define productivity and try and help people think, well, where is the productivity that maybe I haven't identified yet? Where is the improvement that I can look for? What do you think, Nick? Any thoughts around that? Just looking across the business.
Yeah, I guess again from a sales perspective, CRMs are great, and they provide extremely useful management information, particularly if they're well populated by the staff. That's always the first challenge, is getting anybody to populate Salesforce or HubSpot or any other system. But they provide very, very good management information. However, if the end result is not being achieved, despite the fact that the sales staff are making the requisite number of cold calls in a week, or whatever the KPI might be that's put in place to measure performance, then I think you've got to look really very closely at why that might be the case, because it's not necessarily the case that the sales staff aren't any good at what they do. It may well be that they need to be refocused. It may well be that they're not necessarily being given the tools that they need, or the support that they need in order to secure the deal at the end of the day. So understanding that process and looking carefully at why perhaps productivity isn't quite what everybody at a senior management level would like it to be, is really important. And it's not, you've hinted at it. It's not always possible to find out immediately in a very straightforward fashion what the reason is for the lack of productivity.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Nick. Stephen, any thoughts around that? Kind of defining and measuring?
Well, I mean, obviously the bottom line, the sort of margin itself is a useful guide for productivity to optimize that bottom line. And too often people focus on the top line, and whilst that is important, it's very easy to win unprofitable business. So I think that the margin is critical. And then I think it's also important just to have transparent and clear KPIs depending on which role and function people are doing. And if you set those out and get people targeting towards the same thing that heads towards your mutual goals, and then I think that's really important.
Yeah, information feedback I think is also important. I mean, again, in smaller organizations which are founder led, quite often you come across a culture where the front line don't necessarily feel confident enough to give what is extremely valuable feedback. When they're talking to customers and they frequently come across the same reason or the same hurdle, they don't always feel confident enough to be able to feed that back, particularly if the founder isn't receptive to having somebody tell them that perhaps their idea isn't the greatest idea and it could be made better. So that two-way feedback and monitoring, but two-way feedback between frontline and management is again crucial, and that's a cultural thing. You have to create and work at creating a culture where people feel confident enough to be able to give the feedback, positive or negative.
Mm. I think to me that's aligning it with the overall goal that you're trying to work towards. And at the moment, if I think about the big challenge of recruitment and potentially the squeeze on actually being able to keep paying people at a level that the market is requiring now, how can you be more productive with what you've got currently? How can you do more with less resource? And that immediately starts the conversation. Well, how do we make our life easier in whether it's processes we've got, in time it takes to do things, or where we're deploying resource that we've got? I don't know if you've got any tips, maybe Stephen, coming to you on how to really start looking at, okay, we can't find more resource or we can't afford it. How do we drive more from what we have, without pushing people to the limits, but trying to think, how do we just make more from what we've got right now?
Quite often there's a lot of additional process or multiple different ways of doing things. So I've often seen it in companies that I've worked, that every office does something slightly different. So you find it very different to bring in some standardization or some process improvements or IT to try and compact some of the things that we've talked about. So I think if you can try and standardize things, that's obviously great. I think technology is also really important, and ensuring that the people in the organization sort of buy into that. Any sort of change management can be seen to be quite threatening, but I know for my own personal company that I run, when I sort of came in, there were unfortunately too many heads for what we were doing, and so we had to make some hard decisions. But then the people that are still here and working, their job is that much more challenging, more varied, more interesting. And we've incorporated technology to help do some of the functions that we were doing before. But sometimes it is difficult, and you can't just keep increasing it. But if you can align and be transparent in those sort of targets, as we touched on earlier, and reward if we hit beyond those sort of margins, then it's amazing what people sort of buy into, and they might actually be better off by getting a different remuneration structure, perhaps.
The technology piece as well is a challenge to get everyone brought into, right? If you're going to bring in new tech, new processes, or I always say to people that if you've got a process and you're looking to automate it, and you're buying something off the shelf, whether it's a CRM or whether it's some other project management tool, it's been designed for a reason, and hopefully if you've picked the right tool, that's the best way to do things. So don't try and squeeze a current process into. No,
exactly. And all too often what they do is they get the off the shelf product, and then they say, well, actually, it has to be done this way, and it has to be done that way, and we're all guilty of it.
Yeah.
But actually, the best way to do is to streamline it and perhaps use it as an opportunity to change the way that you do it.
You've mentioned a couple of times, Stephen, about remuneration. Well, I think you mentioned it once at least. Remuneration. If we can get targets, we can maybe pay people better. I think that's definitely in mind for a lot of people. But I think there's a lot of new people coming into the workplace that actually are looking for good money, but also better work-life balance, the kind of look and feel of how the business works, whether that's doing good things or in the right kind of sector, whether it's green or more sustainable. There's obviously other things out there that are going to motivate people to be more productive for the greater good of the business, which ultimately is hopefully making a better profit margin. But it's not necessarily rewarding people now in terms of more money. It's what other benefits is being more productive going to bring to the business. And I think sometimes that gets overlooked. Actually, not everyone wants more money, just maybe to be listened to and some of their ideas incorporated, or something else that's just going to make working with the team or individually just more enjoyable. I don't know, Nick, if you've got any thoughts around that, motivating people to be more productive?
I agree with you completely, Rob. I mean, everybody is different, and actually, unless you spend the time getting to know your team, whether that be a senior management team or a sales team, whichever team it is, customer service team, unless you spend time getting to know the individuals, you'll never get to the bottom of what actually makes each of them tick. And I completely agree with you that throwing a stretch target at somebody and the potential to earn a massive bonus, in some cases, that will drive people to achieve the best they possibly can. But in some cases, even in a sales environment, it makes no difference because that individual just isn't bothered, about achieving that target and getting the huge bonus. So regular communication, regular meetings, one-on-ones, hugely important. It was very difficult during COVID trying to do that remotely, but now that there's the opportunity to meet people face to face, really understanding what motivates them and making sure that they, if they are capable people that you want to retain, making sure that they're comfortable in the job that they're doing is vitally important.
No, agreed. And I've raises another point, whether we're working more remotely or back in the office or a combination of both, always trying to squeeze out areas for being more productive is a challenge when you're not in the same office, or some people are, some people aren't. And that's really important to figure out what's motivating people to not be in the office if you want them in. Why are certain people able to work better remotely or from home, or what are the reasons for that? I think that's another complication we've got at the moment, is trying to figure out how to keep productivity improving, but also consistent across people, regardless of where they're based.
Well, absolutely, and I think a lot of people have got very used to working from home, and if the view is that productivity would increase if you brought everybody back into the office because that would spark innovation, discussion, etc., then that's great, but actually achieving it is quite difficult if those people have really over a 2-year period adapted their lives to be something different than it was before COVID. So evaluating whether or not it would make the difference is important. And if the view is that actually, yes, it would make a big difference having everybody back in an office, then I think that there are challenges in doing that, because not everybody's going to want to do it. And if you're then forcing people or trying to force people to come back into the office, then you risk losing perhaps some of your most valued staff. So it's not an easy one. It needs to be tackled very carefully.
Yeah, for sure. Stephen, any thoughts around that, motivating staff?
No, I completely agree. I mean, I think having a flexible approach and is brilliant, but equally, you miss out on some of the interactions that you wouldn't necessarily plan for, and hearing a little bit more about what's happening in the business, and that can be really useful. So finding the right balance, I think it will take some time to work out what that is, and each business will be different.
I think every business is different, but everyone's got so much to learn from other businesses as well. And I think one of the things I enjoy about going into different businesses is you can easily transfer knowledge of, things you're either seeing work really well in another business or work really not very well, and go, avoid doing that, but do this. We've got the benefit of seeing that across multiple businesses and bringing it to the table. But
Sure.
if you're sat there in isolation, it's not easy to benchmark, how you're performing, how you're doing things. Is it really making the best of your people and the things you've got at your hand in terms of resource? So I think there's lots of learnings to be had there. We're just running out of time for this podcast. So I just wanted to finish up on any lasting thoughts the two of you might have on productivity. Nick, any final top tip to encourage someone to think about taking their productivity to another level?
We've not tackled outsourcing. That's a whole discussion in itself. But there are certainly areas where outsourcing can add a big benefit for not a huge amount of money, or not as much as it would cost if you were to build the team internally. So that might be marketing, it might be lead generation, HR, all those things. If you're an SME, rather than employing somebody full time or a team of people, then there are cost savings to be had and increases in productivity and outsourcing it to specialists who actually, much like Evoke, Rob, are dealing with lots of companies and therefore have a very broad perspective across a sector or an industry, and can pull from their past experience to make your business more efficient. So outsourcing would be my top tip.
Great, thanks, Nick. Stephen, last top tip from you.
Just have a look at your costs every year, and quite often you've got suppliers that have been servicing you for years, and whilst you may have a brilliant relationship with them and they do exactly what you want them to do, you might not be getting as good value as you perhaps think. So not all businesses can afford a procurement side of things, but just looking at those and perhaps doing a review once a year or occasionally to challenge some of those, and you'd be amazed that you can deliver some savings by doing something like that.
Great, thank you, Stephen. That's really useful. Well, look, thanks, Nick. Thanks, Stephen. I've really enjoyed that. It's been a good discussion, and I hope some people enjoy listening to this and getting some tips from it. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like more information about the topics discussed in this podcast, then you can find us on our website at moveyourbusinessforward.com.